My siblings called a family meeting to discuss putting Dad in a nursing home and selling his house. They didn't invite me. Dad called me in tears afterward. But when they arrived with the paperwork, they found. I never thought I'd be the one writing one of these posts, but here I am at 2 a.m., still seething with anger and trying to make sense of what just happened. To be honest, I've always been the fixer in my family. The one who swoops in when systems fail and figures out solutions. But this broke something in me. It started 3 days ago when my dad called me. I was in the middle of a security audit when my phone buzzed, and I almost ignored it. The moment I heard his voice, my brain went into debug mode. Dad doesn't cry. Ever. Not when Mom died 6 years ago, not when he had that heart scare last year. But there he was, his voice cracking as he asked if I knew about the meeting my siblings had organized at his house. Basically, my 3 siblings, Ezra, Mary, and Lena, had shown up at Dad's place for what they called a family meeting to discuss his deteriorating condition and the necessity of moving him to a nursing facility. They brought brochures. They had already toured places, and they were already discussing how to split the proceeds from selling his house. All without me. All without him having any real say. Dad is 75, yes. He sometimes forgets where he put his glasses or blanks on a neighbor's name. But he still drives himself to the store, maintains his garden that he's tended for 40 years, and calls me every Saturday with questions about his new tablet. He's not deteriorating. He's just aging normally. I told Dad I'd handle it and drove the 3 hours to his place the next morning. When I arrived, I did 3 things. 1. Checked on Dad's actual condition. 2. Reviewed his financial statements. 3. Called my siblings one by one. What I discovered sent me into a state I can only describe as cold rage, the kind where everything gets very quiet and clear. Dad showed me the health assessment my sister Mary had filled out for him. It portrayed him as practically incapacitated, unable to manage medications, false, experiencing frequent confusion, false, and requiring assistance with basic tasks, completely false. The form had his signature, but when I asked about it, he seemed confused, saying Mary had just asked him to sign some insurance paperwork. JFC. They were gaslighting our father. I spent the afternoon going through Dad's financial records. I'm meticulous about this stuff. It's basically what I do for a living, but with networks, instead of bank statements. The pattern was obvious within an hour. Over the past 8 months, there were multiple loans to my sibling. $12,000 to Ezra for business expenses, $8,500 to Mary for her son's educational program, $4,700 to Lena for car repairs, none documented, none being repaid. Dad had no recollection of the largest transfers, just vague memories of helping the kids out with a bit of money. I called my friend Atlas that evening. We go way back, and he specializes in protecting elderly clients. As I laid out what I was finding, his long silence told me everything. This wasn't just family being opportunistic. This was elder exploitation with a paper trail. When I finally called Ezra, he immediately went defensive, started talking about how concerned they all were, how Dad had been slipping for months, how his house was too much for him. When I pushed back with specific examples of Dad's competence, he deflected, saying I wasn't around enough to see the daily struggles. Mary was worse, sugary, concerned on the surface, while implying I was being selfish for wanting to burden Dad with independence. When I mentioned the financial transfers, she quickly changed the subject. Lena at least had the decency to sound ashamed when confronted, admitting that Ezra's wife, Dolores, had been the main force behind the nursing home plan. Apparently, Dolores had been researching the value of Dad's property, which sits on 3 acres in what is now a very desirable area, and had already contacted a real estate agent just to explore options. I spent the second night at Dad's house cataloging everything. The more I dug, the more I found. Text messages between my siblings discussing how to frame the conversation to convince Stephen. An email from Dolores to a developer about the potential lot subdivision of my father's property. Notes from Mary about which of Dad's antiques were valuable enough to keep versus sell. They had been planning this for months. By morning, I had compiled enough evidence to make my blood boil. Dad found me at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and my laptop. He looked smaller somehow, sitting there in his faded flannel robe, asking if I wanted coffee. The realization that my own siblings were slowly manipulating and robbing him while planning to sell off his home, the home he built with Mom, where all of us grew up, hit me with physical force. I'm not a particularly emotional guy, but watching Dad shuffle around his kitchen, pointing out the new bird feeder he'd installed last weekend, totally on his own, something in me hardened. This house wasn't just real estate. The garden wasn't just landscaping. This was his life, his memories, his independence. When Dad mentioned that my siblings were coming back this weekend to continue the conversation about the nursing facilities, I made my decision. I spent today mapping out a comprehensive plan. My life has taught me that when systems are compromised, you don't just patch the immediate vulnerability. You rebuild with better security, and you make damn sure the attackers can't get back in. My siblings thought they could exploit our father's mild memory issues and his trust in his own children. They thought they could pressure him into giving up his home, his dignity, and his savings without me noticing. They were wrong. I've already contacted Atlas to start preparing the legal documentation. I've scheduled a proper medical assessment with Dad's actual doctor. I've documented every unauthorized financial transaction. I've backed up all the text messages and emails I found. And I've taken photos of every room in Dad's house to document his current living conditions. The family meeting this weekend will still happen, just not the one they're expecting. They think they're coming to continue pressuring our father into a decision that benefits their bank accounts. Instead, they're walking into a carefully prepared intervention where they'll have to answer for what they've done with evidence laid out in front of them. To be honest, I don't even recognize my siblings anymore. The people who shared my childhood, who stood with me at Mom's funeral, who I trusted implicitly. They've become strangers willing to destroy our father's final years for financial gain. I've never considered myself a vengeful person. I fix problems. I don't create them. But as I sit here in Dad's study, listening to him snoring softly in his bedroom down the hall, I'm planning something more than just a fix. My siblings are about to learn exactly what happens when you mistake my distance for disinterest, my quietness for weakness. They wanted to sell Dad's house out from under him? Fine. Let's see how they handle what I've got planned for Saturday. Update. First, thank you for all the supportive comments on my last post. The past week has been a whirlwind of activity, and I wanted to update you on what's happened since I discovered my siblings' plot to ship Dad off to a nursing home and cash in on his property. The morning after my last post, I woke up to find Dad already dressed and in the kitchen at 6 a.m., making pancakes like he did every Sunday when we were kids. It struck me how such a normal moment could feel so precious when you realize someone's trying to take it away. He slid a plate in front of me and casually mentioned that he'd been having trouble sleeping lately, worried about disappointing the kids if he didn't go along with their nursing home plan. That moment crystallized everything for me. Watching him try to hide his trembling hands as he poured syrup. This wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. This was psychological warfare against my father, and I was about to launch a counteroffensive. My strategy broke down into 5 clear objectives. 1. Get objective medical assessment of Dad's actual condition. 2. Secure legal protections for Dad and his assets. 3. Document the full extent of financial exploitation. 4. Create a sustainable living solution that keeps Dad in his home. 5. Gather evidence and allies for the inevitable confrontation. To be honest, I approached this exactly like I would a security breach at work. Identify the vulnerability, contain the damage, implement protections, and prepare for future attempts. The medical assessment was my first priority. I scheduled an appointment with Dad's actual doctor, not the specialist Mary had supposedly consulted. The results were exactly what I expected. Dad has some mild short-term memory issues consistent with normal aging, but he's fully capable of independent living with minimal support. The doctor even noted that Dad scored higher on cognitive tests than many patients 10 years younger. I made sure to get multiple copies of this report, with the doctor's observations that Dad showed no signs of needing institutional care. This is where Atlas really came through. After reviewing the situation, he suggested we immediately file for temporary conservatorship while setting up a more permanent solution. The evidence of financial exploitation, combined with the manipulated health assessment my sister had tricked Dad into signing, was enough to convince a judge to grant emergency protective measures for Dad's accounts. Basically, my siblings weren't going to be able to drain any more money while we sorted this out. I also hired my friend Lennon to conduct a complete audit of Dad's finances going back 3 years. What we found was worse than I initially thought. Beyond the large transfers I'd already discovered, there were dozens of smaller withdrawals, typically between $200, $500, that Dad had no recollection of authorizing. The pattern was clear. My siblings had systematically taken over $67,000 from Dad over the past 2 years, accelerating in the past 8 months. When we showed Dad the evidence, his face just collapsed. The betrayal was finally sinking in. JFC. Every time I thought I understood the depth of their scheme, another layer would appear. Meanwhile, I started on the home modification. Dad's house is a single-story ranch with a large sunroom that Mom had used as her painting studio. It hadn't been used much since she passed, so I converted it into a bedroom with its own small bathroom. My plan was to hire someone to live in and provide any assistance Dad might need, cooking a few meals, driving him to appointments, that sort of thing. The renovations would take about 2 weeks. That's when my siblings realized something was happening. Ezra drove by and saw the construction vehicle. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with messages from all 3 of them demanding to know what I was doing at our family home. The sudden shift from Dad's house that needs to be sold to our family home wasn't lost on me. I didn't respond to any of their messages. Instead, I documented everything. I set up security cameras around Dad's property and made sure all my interactions with my siblings were either recorded, with consent, as we're in a 2-party state, or documented immediately afterward. Atlas had advised me to create a paper trail of everything. On day 5, Mary showed up unannounced. I watched on the security feed as she circled the house, peering in windows before knocking. Dad was napping, so I met her on the porch. I won't get into the specifics of what was said, but her tone shifted rapidly from concerned sister to angry adversary when I calmly explained that Dad would be staying in his home with proper support. She left after threatening legal action. Apparently, I was isolating Dad from his family, who only wanted what was best for him. Ezra took a different approach. He sent me a lengthy email detailing all the ways Dad had shown cognitive decline, incidents that either never happened or were grossly exaggerated. It was clearly crafted to build a case that I was endangering Dad by keeping him in his home. I forwarded it directly to Atlas, who added it to our growing documentation. Lena was the only one who showed any remorse. She called me one evening and I could tell she'd been drinking. She rambled about how she never wanted things to go this far, how Ezra and Mary had convinced her that Dad was unsafe living alone, how Dolores had made the nursing home sound like a luxury resort. I almost felt sorry for her until she mentioned that she'd already mentally spent her portion of the house proceeds to pay off her credit card debt. I recorded the entire call. One unexpected ally emerged during all this. Dad's neighbor, Dwayne. He's a retired guy who's lived next door for over 20 years. When he saw the construction, he came over to check what was happening. After Dad explained the situation, Dwayne revealed that my siblings had approached him months ago, asking if he'd noticed any concerning behavior from Dad. They'd apparently been fishing for evidence of Dad's decline, but Dwayne had nothing to report because, in his words, Arthur is sharper than I am most days. Dwayne also mentioned that Dolores had specifically asked about the property line between their lots and whether he'd be interested in selling a portion of his land as well. The implication was clear. They weren't just planning to sell Dad's house. They were eyeing potential development of the entire area. By day 10, the legal protections were in place. Atlas had helped establish a revocable trust with Dad as the primary beneficiary and me as the trustee. The house and all major assets were transferred into the trust, with provisions that prevented sale without Dad's explicit and verified consent. We also filed for permanent power of attorney, with a requirement for annual review by an independent third party to ensure I wasn't abusing the position. Lennon completed his audit and compiled a comprehensive report of all unauthorized financial transfers. We filed official demands for repayment with all three siblings, giving them 30 days to return the funds or face legal action. The documentation was ironclad, with dates, amounts, and evidence that Dad had never authorized the loan. The home modifications were completed ahead of schedule, and I found a perfect live-in helper, a nursing student named Jordan who needed affordable housing and could provide exactly the level of assistance Dad required. Jordan moved in yesterday, and Dad already seems more relaxed knowing someone will be around regularly. Throughout this process, Dad has shown remarkable resilience. After the initial shock and hurt, he's become increasingly engaged in securing his future. He's been meeting with Atlas, reviewing the financial documents, and actively participating in decisions about the trust. I've seen his confidence returning day by day as he realizes he's not being put out to pasture. After all, this morning I received a text from Ezra that sent a chill down my spine. They're coming tomorrow, all three siblings plus Dolores, to resolve the situation once and for all. They're bringing paperwork from the nursing facility and expect Dad to sign immediately. What they don't know is that we're fully prepared for their arrival. The security cameras are active. The medical assessment is printed and ready. The financial audit is complete with copies for everyone. The trust documents are filed. The live-in helper is settled. And Dad is ready to face his other children with the full knowledge of what they've been trying to do. I'm sitting at Dad's kitchen table now, watching him show Jordan how he likes his coffee prepared. He catches my eye and gives me a small nod, our signal that he's ready for tomorrow's confrontation. For the first time since this began, I feel something beyond anger or determination. It's a sense of justice approaching, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. My siblings thought they were being clever, slowly manipulating Dad and hiding their actions from me. They thought they could bulldoze over his rights and dignity because I lived 3 hours away. They thought wrong. Tomorrow, they'll understand exactly what happens when you try to exploit someone I love. The table is set, the trap is laid, and tomorrow my siblings will walk right into it, armed with nursing home brochures and fake concern, completely unaware that their plan was dismantled days ago. I'll update you tomorrow after it's done. Update 2. The day of reckoning arrived with an odd sense of calm. I woke at 5 a.m. and found Dad already in the kitchen, making coffee with a steadiness in his hands I hadn't seen in days. Something about having a plan in place had rejuvenated him. He nodded at me and slid a mug across the counter, mentioning that the weather forecast showed clear skies, perfect for what he called taking out the trash. By 9 a.m., our team was assembled. Atlas arrived first, carrying a briefcase that looked purposefully intimidating. Lennon followed with his financial documentation. Dr. Chen, who'd conducted Dad's cognitive assessment, came despite it being his day off. Our final addition was Detective Rivera from the Elder Abuse Unit, who I'd contacted after Lennon uncovered the full extent of the financial exploitation. Her presence wasn't strictly necessary yet, but as she put it when I called her, sometimes the badge does all the talking. Dad sat at the head of his dining room table, looking more like the man who'd raised me than the diminished figure my siblings had been manipulating. Jordan remained discreetly in the background, organizing refreshments that no one would want, but that established this as Dad's home, where he was in control. At precisely 10:07 a.m., 3 minutes after their text said they'd arrive, my siblings' cars pulled into the driveway. My security system's notification pinged my watch. Through the window, I watched Ezra check his hair in his car mirror before getting out. Mary was clutching a folder of what I assumed were nursing home brochures. Lena looked nervous, hanging back as Dolores strode confidently toward the door, carrying what appeared to be legal documents. I opened the door before they could knock. The momentary confusion on their faces shifted to shock as they registered the additional vehicles in the driveway. That shock turned to visible alarm when they entered the dining room and saw our assembled team. Ezra's eyes darted from person to person, his practiced smile faltering. Dolores reached for her phone, but thought better of it when Detective Rivera casually adjusted her jacket. The setup was deliberate. Dad at the head of the table, me at his right hand, Atlas on his left, the others arrayed behind us. Across the table, 4 empty chairs waited. The only items on the table were a digital recorder, a stack of folders color-coded for each sibling, and a pitcher of water with glasses. To be honest, I'd rehearsed this moment in my head dozens of times, but nothing compared to watching it unfold. Ezra tried to take control immediately, stepping forward with hand extended toward Dad, playing the concerned son. Dad didn't move, just stared at him with a calmness that made Ezra's hand slowly lower. I began by outlining what would happen today. No interruption, no denials. They would listen completely before speaking. If they chose to leave before we finished, Detective Rivera would consider that an admission of guilt, and criminal charges would be filed by end of day. They sat. The next 2 hours were methodical dissection of their scheme. I started with the medical assessment, where Dr. Chen explained that Dad showed absolutely no need for nursing home care. As he detailed Dad's above-average cognitive scores, Mary's complexion went from flushed to ashen. The falsified health assessment she'd created constituted fraud and potentially practicing medicine without a license. Next came the financial revelation. Lennon's presentation was brutal in its precision. Not just the $67,000 I'd originally discovered, but a total of $175,823 taken from Dad over 3 years. The stunned look on Dad's face told me even he hadn't realized the extent. Lennon had traced everything: the vacations, funded by Dad's money, the car payment, Ezra's gambling debts that he'd hidden from his wife, Mary's cosmetic procedure, Lena's online shopping addiction. When Lennon revealed that Dolores had been accessing Dad's online accounts using passwords she'd obtained while helping him with his computer, Detective Rivera made a show of taking notes. The implication was clear. This wasn't just family taking advantage of Dad. This was coordinated elder fraud. Atlas then laid out the legal consequences. The trust was established and irrevocable. Dad's assets were protected. But that was just the beginning. He slid the color-coded folders across the table, one to each sibling. Inside each folder was 1. A demand for full repayment of all borrowed funds, plus 8% interest within 30 days. 2. Documentation of their specific acts of financial exploitation. 3. A copy of the state's elder abuse statutes with relevant sections, highlighted. 4. A formal complaint ready to be filed with the police and district attorney. 5. A civil lawsuit prepared against each of them individually. But I'd gone further. Each folder also contained information specific to their personal circumstances. For Ezra, printouts of communications I'd sent to his business partners detailing his financial misconduct. His construction company relied on trust and reputation, both now in jeopardy. I'd also included evidence of him using business resources to research nursing homes on company time, along with his search history for property developers interested in Dad's land. For Mary, documentation of her forging Dad's signature on medical assessment, which I'd already forwarded to the state licensing board where she worked. Her folder included a formal ethics complaint and witness statements from Dad's doctor about falsified medical claims. Her job at the hospital would be gone within days. For Lena, proof that she'd used her position at the bank to monitor Dad's accounts and timing withdrawals to avoid triggering alerts. Financial institutions take internal theft seriously. The regional manager had already scheduled a meeting with her for Monday. And for Dolores, the most comprehensive file of all. As Ezra's wife and the mastermind, she'd been the most careless. Her folder contained recordings of her calls to nursing homes where she misrepresented herself as Dad's power of attorney. documentation of her contacting real estate agents about Dad's property months ago, evidence she'd accessed Dad's medical records using her credentials at the doctor's office where she worked. Each violation meticulously catalogued, with dates, times, and applicable laws broken. Their faces changed as they reviewed their folders. Ezra's complexion reddened to dangerous levels. Mary's hands trembled so badly she could barely turn pages. Lena started crying silently. Dolores maintained her composure longer than the others, but when she reached the last page of her folder, a formal notification that all evidence had been backed up to a secure server that would automatically send everything to authorities if anything happened to me or Dad, something behind her eyes simply broke. I then revealed the final layer of our counterattack. While they'd been busy planning to take Dad's house, I'd been investigating their finances. Each was underwater in different ways. Ezra's business, taking loans he couldn't repay. Mary's enormous credit card debt. Lena's underwater mortgage. Dolores's tax problems from unreported income. All of them counting on Dad's money to bail them out. Dad remained silent through most of this. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. He told them he had loved them their entire lives and would have given them anything they truly needed if they'd just asked, honestly. Instead, they'd conspired to take everything, including his dignity. Then he officially disowned them. Atlas slid over the updated will and trust document. Dad had removed all 3 siblings as beneficiaries of anything. Furthermore, he'd established that a substantial portion of his estate would now fund a foundation specifically targeting elder abuse named after our mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Ezra tried to bluster, claiming we were overreacting. Detective Rivera chose that moment to ask if he'd like to make that statement down at the station instead. He deflated instantly. With cold precision, I outlined their options. 1. Repay every cent within 30 days and stay completely away from Dad. 2. Face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, professional ruin, and public exposure. There would be no negotiation, no partial payment, no payment plans, full repayment, or complete destruction, their choice. As they left, I handed each a final document restraining orders already approved by a judge, prohibiting them from coming within 500 feet of Dad or his property. Detective Rivera escorted them out, making it clear she'd be monitoring compliance. The aftermath came swiftly. Within a week, Ezra's business partners bought him out for pennies on the dollar after learning of his attempted exploitation of his father. Mary was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Lena was terminated from the bank after an internal audit. Dolores faced the most severe consequences, criminal charges for unauthorized access of medical records and wire fraud related to her communications with real estate agents while misrepresenting herself. Dad flourished with Jordan's help. The garden expanded. He joined a senior social group. Without the constant emotional manipulation from my siblings, his memory issues actually improved. 3 weeks later, when the repayment deadline approached, only Lena had made efforts to return her portion. The others made excuses, threatened counter-lawsuits, or simply ignored our communications. So I did exactly what I promised. I authorized Atlas to file everything. The criminal charges hit first. The local paper ran the story. 3 siblings charged with elder exploitation of father. Their names, mugshots, and details of the case became public record. Their social circles imploded as friends and colleagues distanced themselves. Ezra's wife filed for divorce after learning about his gambling debts. Mary's husband moved out. Only Lena showed genuine remorse, cooperating fully with investigators in exchange for leniency. The civil lawsuit proceeded simultaneously. With their assets frozen and legal bills mounting, my siblings faced financial ruin. Ezra and Mary lost their homes to foreclosure within months. Dolores pled guilty to reduced charges, but still received probation and lost her license. Their credit was destroyed, their reputations shattered, their futures bleak. Some might think this revenge excessive. I consider it precision-targeted justice. Dad and I recently sat on his back porch, watching the sunset over the garden he'd tended for decades. He mentioned that he sometimes feels guilty about the severity of the consequences his other children face. I reminded him that they had planned to strip him of everything: his home, his independence, his dignity, all while stealing his money. They'd had countless opportunities to back down, apologize, make amends. Instead, they'd doubled down at every turn. Sometimes the only language predators understand is consequences. Last week, Dad decided to renovate the kitchen, something he'd been putting off for years. As we reviewed design options, he mentioned he might live another 15, 20 years in this house. His eyes were clear, his mind sharp, his happiness evident. That's my real victory, not the destruction of my siblings' lives, though I can't pretend I don't sleep well, knowing they can never hurt him again, but the reclaiming of Dad's future. They tried to write the end of his story. Instead, I helped him start a new chapter, while ensuring they spend the rest of their lives regretting what they attempted to do. Justice served, case closed.